God, don't let me suffer, said the old woman bitten by a snake, but the rancher arrived and changed her life forever. Please comment telling me what you thought of this story, giving it a score from 0 to 10, and let me know what city you're watching from. I really want to know if you enjoyed my story and get to know you better, so subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The sun rose slowly over the verdant fields of Oak Creek, painting the Blue Ridge Mountains in golden hues that promised another day of hard work on the Willow Creek Ranch. Arthur Vance, at 35, had already developed a meticulous routine that began even before the first rays of sunlight touched the red clay soil. His calloused hands adjusted the saddle on his white horse as he mentally organized the day's tasks. Check the fences of the north pasture, examine the cattle near the creek, and supervise the corn planting in the newly prepared area. There was something comforting in the predictability of those days. Since fully taking over the ranch's management after his father's passing 3 years ago, Arthur had found in the land and rural labor a way to fill the void he had carried since childhood. Growing up without a maternal presence, lost when he was only 12, had shaped him into a reserved personality, yet deeply empathetic to the suffering of others. The white horse, named Hope for a reason he himself couldn't fully explain, trod firmly along the familiar paths of the property. It was a noble animal, purchased 2 years earlier from a local breeder, and had become his constant companion on the long journeys across the ranch's 700 acres. Arthur spoke to the animal as if it were an old friend, sharing thoughts he rarely shared with other people. The morning was particularly quiet when he decided to check the area near the creek that divided his property from the neighboring ranch. It was a region that demanded constant attention, especially during the dry season, when animals sought water and could end up getting injured on the rocks or stuck in the thicker mud of the banks. It was the low moan that first caught his attention, a sound almost imperceptible, mixed with the noise of the running water and the distant song of morning birds. Arthur pulled the reins, making Hope stop near a set of large rocks that formed a kind of natural alcove by the creek's edge. God, don't let me suffer, he heard clearly this time, and his heart pounded in his chest. He dismounted quickly, tying the reins to a nearby branch, and walked in the direction of the voice. That's when he found her. An elderly woman, appearing to be about 67 years old, was lying among the rocks, one of her legs bent at an odd angle and her face contorted in pain. Her grey hair was disheveled, her simple, worn-out clothes were torn in several places, and she was clutching her right knee while muttering prayers in a low voice. "Ma'am, are you all right?" Arthur asked, approaching carefully. The woman raised her eyes to him, and what Arthur saw touched him deeply. It wasn't just physical pain, but an accumulated sadness that seemed to weigh on those fragile shoulders like a heavy blanket. Her eyes, though clouded by pain, revealed an intelligence and dignity that contrasted sharply with her ragged appearance. "Young man, help me," she whispered with a trembling voice. "I think a snake got me." Arthur quickly examined the woman's leg and identified 2 small red marks on her right knee, already beginning to swell. The pattern was unmistakable, a rattlesnake bite. Without hesitation, he gently took the woman in his arms, noticing how thin and light she was for someone her age. "I'm taking you to the hospital right now," he said, walking quickly towards his horse. "What's your name?" "Eleanor," she replied, gripping his shirt sleeve tightly. "Eleanor Hayes. Young man, I don't want to die like this, alone." Those words hit Arthur like a punch to the gut. There was something in the way she said "alone" that resonated with his own emotional scars. He carefully placed Eleanor on the horse's back, mounted in front of her, and held her arm firmly to keep her stable during the ride to his truck, parked near the corral. During the drive to the Oak Creek Hospital, Eleanor drifted in and out of consciousness, murmuring things Arthur couldn't fully understand. Occasionally, she quoted lines that seemed to be from classic poems, spoke of the third-grade boys, and mentioned names like Mark Twain and Emily Dickinson in a way that suggested an intimate familiarity with literature. At the hospital, while the doctors worked to neutralize the snake venom, Arthur remained in the waiting room. He couldn't explain why he felt responsible for this stranger, but something about the encounter had moved him deeply. When a nurse asked for Eleanor's personal information to fill out the admission form, he discovered something disturbing. The woman had no documents, couldn't provide a fixed address, and had no close relatives to contact. "She said she has nowhere to go," the nurse explained with a concerned tone, "and from her state of malnutrition, it seems she's been living on the streets for some time." Arthur felt a tightness in his chest. How had an educated and apparently cultured woman ended up in such a situation? During the 3 days of hospitalization that followed, he visited Eleanor religiously, bringing fresh fruit from his ranch and talking with her about various subjects. He became increasingly intrigued by the way she spoke about literature, history, and pedagogy, even under the effect of the medication. It was as if two people inhabited the same body, the ragged, homeless woman he had found by the creek and the erudite teacher who emerged during their conversations. Eleanor spoke about child literacy techniques. With the same ease, she recited passages from The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, and her hands, though calloused by hard labor, made delicate gestures when explaining complex pedagogical concepts. On the third day, when the doctors confirmed that the danger had passed and that Eleanor could be discharged, Arthur made a decision that would change both of their lives. He found her sitting on the edge of the hospital bed, looking out the window with an expression of someone who didn't know where to go. "Miss Eleanor," he said, approaching carefully, "do you have a place to stay?" She lowered her head, and Arthur noticed her hands were trembling slightly. "I don't have anything left, son. No house, no family that cares about me." Her voice carried a pain that went beyond the snakebite, an emotional wound that seemed to have been open for a long time. Arthur sat in the chair next to the bed, and for the first time since he had found her, Eleanor began to tell her story. She had been an elementary school teacher in the public system for 40 years, had retired with honors and lived comfortably in a house she inherited from her parents. She had 2 adult children, Richard, 43, and Michelle, 41, both married and seemingly well-established in life. For years, she had helped her children financially, even deeding her own house to them as an early inheritance so they could pay off debts and invest in their businesses. "I thought I was securing their future," she said, tears beginning to stream down her wrinkled cheeks. "But they sold the house without telling me, took all the money and told me I had to fend for myself, that they had their own families to worry about now." Arthur listened in silence, feeling a growing fury in his chest. How could children treat their own mother that way? He thought of his own mother, who had passed away so early, and how he would give anything to have had more time with her. "Since then, I've been living by collecting cans along the roads, sleeping under bridges when it rains, and eating whatever I can find," Eleanor continued. "Sometimes I go 3 days without a decent meal. My own children threw me out of the house as if I were a stranger." At that moment, Arthur made a decision that came more from the heart than from reason. "You're coming with me to the ranch," he said firmly. "I have a foreman's house that's empty. You can stay there as long as you like." Eleanor looked up, surprised. "Son, you barely know me. Why would you do this for me?" Arthur smiled for the first time in days. "Because my mother taught me, before she passed, that we help those in need, and you're in need." Eleanor's first week at Willow Creek Ranch passed like a slow, careful awakening. The foreman's house, though simple, offered a comfort she hadn't experienced in months. A clean bed, running water, and the security of 4 walls that wouldn't collapse on her head during the night. Arthur had provided suitable clothes, bought groceries, and even found some used books in town, figuring a former teacher would miss reading. During the first few days, Eleanor moved around the small house with the caution of someone who feared this kindness was only temporary. Her hands trembled slightly as she prepared breakfast, not from the residual effect of the rattlesnake venom, but from the emotion of having a kitchen at her disposal again. She would watch Arthur leave for work mounted on hope and eagerly await his return in the late afternoon, when he always stopped by to check if she was well. "Miss Eleanor, you don't have to do this," Arthur said on the fourth day, finding her sweeping the small yard of the foreman's house with excessive care. "You're here to rest and recover." "Son," she replied with a shy smile, "these old hands don't know how to stay idle, and after so long living off the charity of others, it feels good to be able to give back in some way." There was something maternal in the way Eleanor pronounced the word son that struck a sensitive chord in Arthur's heart. It was a tone he vaguely remembered hearing from his own mother, filled with protective affection and genuine concern. When she began preparing his meals, seasoning the food exactly the way he liked it without him having to ask, Arthur felt a warmth in his chest he hadn't experienced in years. "How did you know I like plenty of garlic with my beans?" he asked one afternoon, savoring the dinner she had prepared. Eleanor smiled, her eyes twinkling. 40 years of teaching children teaches you to read people, my son, and you have the look of someone who grew up eating food seasoned with love." The phrase, "my son," slipped out naturally, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. They both noticed the intimacy of the term, but neither made a move to correct it. To Arthur, it sounded like music. To Eleanor, it was a maternal instinct that had been brutally rejected by her own children and had now found a new object of care. It was in the second week that the first discovery happened. Eleanor had offered to organize the ranch's office, which was in complete disarray since Arthur had taken over the administration alone. While sorting papers into categories, she found an old folder with documents dating back to the time the property was purchased by Arthur's father. "Arthur," she called that evening when he returned from work. Her voice had a strange tone, a mix of curiosity and concern. "Can I ask you a question about the history of this ranch?" "Of course, Miss Eleanor. What do you want to know?" She held up a property deed, yellowed with age. "Did your father buy this land from a family named Meadows?" Arthur nodded, pouring himself the coffee she had prepared. "Yes, it was in 1987, if I'm not mistaken. Dad said it was a court auction. The family was in financial trouble and lost the property." Eleanor's face turned visibly pale. "Meadows? Clementine Meadows?" "I think so. Why do you ask? Did you know them?" Eleanor sat down heavily in the kitchen chair, her hands trembling as she held her coffee cup. "Clementine was my best friend, Arthur. We worked together at the public school for 20 years. She never recovered from losing this land. The revelation fell between them like a stone in a calm lake, creating ripples of unease that spread through the quiet kitchen. Arthur felt a knot in his stomach, a strange feeling that fate had woven a more complex web than he could comprehend. "Clementine was born on this ranch," Eleanor continued, her voice thick with emotion. "Her parents, her grandparents, they all lived here. It was more than property to her. It was the root of her existence. When she lost the land, she fell into a deep depression. She said she had lost her soul along with the property." Arthur listened in silence, processing the implications of that information. His family had built their life on the loss of another family, and now he was sheltering someone intimately connected to that history. "What happened to her?" he asked, though he feared the answer. "Clementine passed away 2 years after losing the ranch," Eleanor replied, wiping away a tear that ran down her cheek. "The doctors said it was her heart, but I knew it was from heartbreak. She died of longing for this land. That night, Arthur couldn't sleep. He walked through the house, thinking about the cruel irony of fate. He had saved a woman who was intimately linked to the property his family owned. He felt simultaneously guilty for the happiness his family had built on another's suffering and grateful for having found Eleanor before it was too late. The next day, he decided to talk more deeply with Eleanor about Clementine. He found her in the yard, tending to a small herb garden she had improvised near the foreman's house. "Miss Eleanor, do you think my father knew about the Meadows family's situation when he bought the ranch?" Eleanor paused what she was doing and looked directly at him. "Your father was a good man, Arthur. If he had known about Clementine's desperation, I'm sure he would have tried to help in some way. But court auctions are cold processes where personal stories get hidden behind numbers and papers. Did Clementine ever mention anything about documents? Anything that could have changed her situation?" The question made Eleanor stop what she was doing completely. She was silent for a long moment, as if accessing very old and painful memories. "She mentioned something once," she said finally, her voice low and thoughtful. "She said there were important documents hidden somewhere on the property, papers that could have proven that the sale had been irregular in some way." "What kind of documents?" "She never told me exactly, but Clementine was convinced the family's accountant had done something wrong. She talked about forged signatures, about sales made without the family's real consent." Eleanor paused, looking around as if seeing the property with new eyes. "She said she had hidden those documents in a safe place where no one would think to look." Arthur felt a shiver run down his spine. "Do you have any idea where that could be?" "Clementine was always in love with the old oak tree on this property. She said it was the oldest tree on the ranch, planted by her great-grandfather. Whenever she was nervous or worried, she would go sit under that tree to think." The two walked to the spot, an area near the main house where a centuries-old oak tree grew. Its branches spread out, forming a generous canopy that offered cool shade even on the hottest days. Eleanor approached the tree with reverence, running her hands over the rough bark. "She used to say this tree held the Meadows family's secrets," Eleanor murmured, "that as long as the oak lived, the truth about the ranch would stay alive too." Arthur carefully observed the area around the tree, looking for signs that something might be buried there. The soil around the main trunk seemed to have been disturbed at some point in the past, forming small mounds that didn't follow the natural pattern of the terrain. "Ms. Eleanor," he said, his voice filled with determination, "I think we need to find out what Clementine hid here." That afternoon they worked together, digging carefully around the oak tree. Eleanor insisted on helping, even though her delicate hands weren't used to the heavy work. There was something ritualistic about that moment, as if they were paying a posthumous tribute to Clementine's memory. When Arthur's shovel hit something solid, buried about 1.5 feet deep, they both felt their hearts race. It was a wooden box, small but heavy, protected by thick plastic that had preserved its contents from moisture. Inside the box, they found exactly what Eleanor had described: old documents, photographs, and several handwritten sheets in a careful script that clearly belonged to Clementine. There was also a sealed letter addressed to whoever finds these papers. With trembling hands, Eleanor opened the letter and began to read aloud. "If someone is reading this, it means the truth about the illegal sale of the Meadows Ranch can finally come to light. The accountant, Everett Monroe, forged signatures, manipulated documents, and sold our property without our true knowledge. The proof is in the papers accompanying this letter. I ask whoever finds this to bring justice to my family's memory." The silence that followed was heavy with implications that neither of them could fully process. Arthur looked at Eleanor, seeing in her eyes a mix of sadness for her lost friend and concern for what this discovery would mean for him. "Arthur," she said softly, This discovery changes everything. The weeks following the discovery of Clementine's documents brought a constant tension to life at Willow Creek Ranch. Arthur had hired a lawyer from Oak Creek to examine the found papers, but each day of waiting for the results of the legal analysis increased his anxiety about the future of the property he considered his home. Eleanor noticed the weight the discovery had placed on Arthur's shoulders. She watched him during meals, noting how he distractedly picked at his food and how his eyes would get lost on the horizon when he thought she wasn't looking. Guilt consumed her. She was the one who had insisted on looking for the documents, and now she saw the young man who had saved her suffering the consequences. "My son," she said one Thursday morning as she served breakfast, "you're eating yourself up inside because of those papers." Arthur looked up from his plate, and Eleanor saw a vulnerability he rarely showed. "Miss Eleanor, if those documents prove that the purchase of the ranch was indeed illegal, I could lose everything. This land is all I have. It's the only thing that connects me to my father and my mother." "And if it is proven that the purchase was irregular?" she asked gently. "What would you do?" Arthur was silent for a long moment, stirring his coffee with mechanical movements. "I don't know, Miss Eleanor. Honestly, I don't know." Eleanor reached out and gently touched his arm. "I know you'll do the right thing, whatever it is. That's the kind of man you are." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of a car coming up the dirt road that led to the ranch. Arthur frowned. He wasn't expecting visitors, and few knew the way to his property. Through the window, they saw a blue sedan stopping near the main house. Two adults got out of the vehicle, a man of about 43, wearing expensive but slightly wrinkled clothes, and a woman of about 41, with dyed hair and a large bag slung over her shoulder. Both looked around with an expression that mixed curiosity and calculation. Eleanor paled instantly upon recognizing them. "My God," she whispered. Her hands are trembling as she clung to the kitchen table. "It's my children." "Richard and Michelle?" Arthur asked, remembering the name she had mentioned. "Yes," she answered, fear evident in her voice. "But how did they find me? And why have they come here?" Arthur watched through the window as the two headed towards the foreman's house. The man walked with an arrogant posture, gesturing as he spoke to his sister, and the woman jotted something down in a small notepad. "Miss Eleanor, do you want me to go talk to them first?" Arthur offered, noticing how visibly shaken she was. "No, my son. They came looking for me, so it's me they need to talk to." Eleanor straightened her shoulders, gathering a dignity Arthur had learned to admire in her. "But can you stay close? I don't trust them." Richard knocked on the door of the foreman's house with unnecessary force, the sound echoing like an assault. When Eleanor opened the door, his face contorted into an expression of false concern. "Mother!" he exclaimed loudly, opening his arms as if to hug her. "We've finally found you. We've been looking for months, so worried." Eleanor instinctively recoiled, not returning the forced embrace. "What do you want here, Richard?" Michelle stepped forward, placing a possessive hand on her mother's arm. "Mother, we heard from neighbors in Oak Creek that you were living with some rich rancher. We came to take you back home." "This is my home now," Eleanor replied firmly, "and you made it very clear I wasn't welcome in your homes." Richard looked around the small foreman's house, his eyes registering every detail with calculated interest. "Mother, you can't be living as a charity case on a stranger's property. That's not right." "Arthur is not a stranger," Eleanor said, her voice gaining strength. "He saved me when I was dying by the creek, took me to the hospital, and gave me a home when you threw me out." Michelle exchanged a quick glance with her brother. "Mother, you're getting older, and you might be getting deceived. This man could be taking advantage of your situation." It was at that moment that Arthur appeared at the door. his imposing presence making the two children retreat slightly. "Good afternoon," he said with cold politeness. "I'm Arthur Vance, owner of this property." Richard extended his hand with a forced smile. "Richard, Hayes, Eleanor's son. A pleasure to meet you. We want to thank you for taking care of our mother, but now we've come to get her." "Your mother doesn't seem to want to go anywhere," Arthur replied, ignoring the outstretched hand. "Look here, buddy," Richard said, his tone becoming more aggressive. "Our mother is our legal responsibility. She's elderly and can't make decisions on her own about where to live." Eleanor stepped forward, placing herself between Arthur and her children. "I can so make my own decisions. You lost the right to worry about me when you put me on the street like an animal." Michelle started to cry in an exaggerated manner. "Mother, we never meant to hurt you. It was a misunderstanding. The house had to be sold to pay Richard's debts, but it was always our intention to take care of you." "Lies!" Eleanor exploded, years of hurt finally finding a voice. "You sold my house, took all the money and told me to fend for myself. Don't play the victim now." Richard changed tactics, adopting a threatening tone. "Mother, you are illegally residing on someone else's property. If you don't come with us voluntarily, we'll have to take legal action to protect you." "What kind of action?" Arthur asked, his voice low but filled with authority. "We can file a lawsuit claiming our mother is being held against her will or that she's being financially exploited," Michelle replied, regaining her composure. "We have legal rights over her." Eleanor felt her legs go weak and leaned against the doorframe. The legal threat terrified her, reminding her of how she had lost everything the last time she trusted lawyers and official papers. "Furthermore," Richard continued, looking directly at Arthur, "we've discovered that this gentleman might not be as honest as he seems. We've been investigating, and there are rumors in town about irregularities in the purchase of this ranch." Arthur felt his blood run cold. How could they know about Clementine's documents? There was only one possible explanation. Someone in Oak Creek was talking, possibly the very lawyer he had hired. "I don't know what you're talking about," Arthur said, but his voice betrayed a slight insecurity. Michelle smiled with malice. "We know you found some old documents, and we know those documents could prove this ranch was bought illegally. That means you could lose everything at any moment." Eleanor looked at Arthur in horror, finally realizing the extent of the trap her children had set. They hadn't come for her out of love or concern. They had come because they knew about the documents and wanted a piece of whatever might result from that discovery. "That's why you came," she said, her voice filled with disgust. "You didn't come for me because you were worried. You came because you think there's money involved." Richard laughed cynically. "Mother, you've always been naive. Of course, we're worried, but we also have to be practical. If this ranch was stolen from the rightful family, there could be compensation lawsuits that could yield a lot of money. And since our mother is the only living connection to the Meadows family—" "You want to use me," Eleanor whispered, the realization hitting her like a slap. "You want to use me to make money from someone else's misfortune, just like you did with the house that was mine." Arthur saw the desperation on Eleanor's face and made a decision. "You heard her answer. She doesn't want to go with you. Now get off my property." "It's not that simple," Michelle said, pulling some papers from her bag. "We've already filed a petition in the county court asking for guardianship of our mother due to temporary mental incapacity. In a few days, we'll have a court order to remove her from here." The world seemed to collapse around Eleanor. After months of finally feeling safe and loved, her own children were once again destroying her life, this time using the law as a weapon. "You can't do this," Arthur said, but even he knew that the legal threats from Eleanor's children were real and dangerous. Richard smiled triumphantly. "We can and we will. Our mother will return home with us, and all rights related to the documents you found will be ours by inheritance. You'd better cooperate, Mr. Vance, because this fight is just beginning. The days following the threat from Eleanor's children were marked by a suffocating tension at Willow Creek Ranch. Arthur had hired a second lawyer, Mr. Marcus Pereira, a specialist in family law, to fight the guardianship petition filed by Richard and Michelle. Meanwhile, Eleanor had sunk into a deep depression, spending hours looking out the window without saying a word. "They're going to take me away from here," she would murmur during sleepless nights. "And they'll destroy you in the process, my son." Arthur's heart broke seeing her in that state. The strong, dignified woman he had come to love as a mother was falling apart before his eyes, and he felt powerless to protect her. It was on a Tuesday morning, 2 weeks after the visit from Eleanor's children, that Mr. Pereira arrived at the ranch with a strange expression on his face. He was carrying a thick folder of documents and seemed simultaneously excited and nervous. "Arthur, Miss Eleanor, I need to talk to you about an extraordinary discovery," he said, sitting at the kitchen table in the main house. "The documents you found from Clementine Meadows are just the tip of the iceberg." Eleanor looked up for the first time in days, a spark of hope shining in her tired eyes. "I discovered that Clementine had registered a will with a notary just 3 months before her death," the lawyer continued. "A will that was never executed because no one knew of its existence." "How is that possible?" Arthur asked. "Clementine used a notary in Charlottesville, far from Oak Creek, probably to maintain secrecy. The will names a single universal heir, Eleanor Hayes, due to the deep friendship they shared and the absence of other living relatives. The silence that followed was deafening. Eleanor looked at the lawyer as if he were speaking a foreign language. "This means," Mr. Pereira continued, "that Ms. Eleanor is the rightful owner of a considerable portion of this ranch, according to the last will of Clementine Meadows." Arthur felt the world spin around him. Not only had the ranch been bought irregularly, but now he discovered that the woman he had sheltered out of compassion was, legally, the owner of part of his land. "But there's more," the lawyer said, noticing the impact of his words. "During my investigation, I found that Eleanor was not lying when she said she was a distant cousin of Clementine. They were third cousins, which makes the will even more legally valid." Eleanor finally found her voice. "Clementine never told me about any will. Probably because she planned to tell you in person. But death took her before she could," Mr. Pereira explained. "However, there is something Miss Eleanor needs to explain to me. Did you know about your family connection to Clementine when you arrived here?" Eleanor lowered her head, her hands trembling slightly. I suspected. When Arthur told me the last name of the family that had lost the ranch, I recognized it, but I wasn't sure it was the same Clementine." "And why didn't you say anything sooner?" Arthur asked, confused. "Because I wanted to know your character first," she replied, tears beginning to stream. "I wanted to be sure of what kind of man you were before revealing any connection to this property. And when I realized you were good and honest, I was afraid you would kick me out if you knew the truth." Arthur was silent for a long moment, processing the revelation. Then, to the surprise of both, he began to laugh softly. "Miss Eleanor," he said, getting up and going to her, "you saved my life as much as I saved yours. If it weren't for your presence here, I would have continued living as a bitter and lonely man." At that moment, Mr. Pereira cleared his throat, drawing their attention. "There is one more important revelation. During my investigation into the accountant, Everett Monroe, I discovered that he is still alive. He is 80 years old and lives in a nursing home in Charlottesville. And when he learned that the case was being investigated, he asked to speak with me." "What did he say?" Eleanor asked. "Everett confessed everything. He forged Clementine's signature, manipulated documents, and facilitated an illegal sale of the property. But there is a detail you need to know. Arthur's father, Joseph Vance knew nothing about it. Arthur raised his head, surprised. "What do you mean?" "Your father bought the ranch, believing it was a legitimate court auction. Everett presented all the forged documents as if they were authentic. Joseph was as much a victim as Clementine in this story." The revelation brought immense relief to Arthur, who had carried a silent guilt about his father's integrity. "Everett wants to redeem himself," the lawyer continued. "He is willing to testify publicly about what he did, and he has documents saved that prove the entire fraudulent scheme." Just then, Mr. Pereira's phone rang. It was his assistant, with news about the guardianship petition filed by Eleanor's children. "There are interesting developments," the lawyer said after hanging up. "Richard and Michelle made a serious mistake. During the investigation for the guardianship process, we discovered that they had forged their mother's signature on several bank documents over the years, systematically stealing her retirement pension." Eleanor paled. "They stole my money." "Not only that, Michelle sold several valuable items that belonged to you, including family jewelry and antique furniture. We have documentary proof of everything. The discovery of the financial betrayal was the final blow to the illusion that her children had any true love for her." Eleanor cried bitterly, not for the loss of the money, but for the definitive confirmation that she had raised two children capable of such cruelty. "What happens now?" Arthur asked. "Now we have several options," Mr. Pereira replied. "Ms. Eleanor can claim her rightful inheritance of the property, sue her children for theft and forgery, and also decide what to do about you, Arthur." Eleanor looked at Arthur with eyes full of motherly love. "I know exactly what I want to do." A week later, in a simple ceremony held at the Oak Creek courthouse, Eleanor surprised everyone with her decision. Instead of claiming her share of the ranch or evicting Arthur from the property, she proposed something no one expected, a reverse adoption where she would legally become Arthur's adoptive mother. "My son," she said, holding his hands during the ceremony, "you gave me a family when I had none. Now I want to formalize what our hearts have already known for months." The adoption process also included the formalization of a partnership in the ranch, where Eleanor contributed the legal legitimacy of the property, and Arthur continued with the management work. Together, they became a real family, united not by blood, but by genuine love and the conscious choice to care for one another. Richard and Michelle were prosecuted for forgery and theft. The judge not only ordered them to repay all the money stolen from their mother over the years, but also forbade them from approaching Eleanor or the ranch. The guardianship petition was vehemently rejected, and they were forced to pay the court costs. Everett Monroe, fulfilling his promise of redemption, provided a full testimony about the corruption scheme he had orchestrated decades ago. His confession not only validated Eleanor's legal ownership of part of the ranch, but also definitively cleared Joseph Vance's name. 6 months later, during the Mother's Day celebration at Willow Creek Ranch, Eleanor watched Arthur teaching basic planting techniques to a group of children from the Oak Creek Public School. She had suggested the educational project, using her experience as a teacher to turn the ranch into a learning center for sustainable agriculture. "Grandma Eleanor," one of the children called out, "your son is very smart." Eleanor smiled, her heart overflowing with happiness. "Yes, he is, my dear, and he's the best son a mother could have." Arthur looked at her from across the field and waved, shouting, "Mama, come help us over here." The word Mama echoed through the fields like a song, carrying with it the entire journey of pain, loss, and redemption that had brought them to that moment. Eleanor walked towards her adopted son, her steps firm on the land that was now legally hers, but which she had chosen to share with the man who had found her when she needed him most. On that golden May afternoon, under the blue Virginia sky, Two wounded souls discovered that true family is not the one we are born into, but the one we choose to build with love, patience, and dedication. And that sometimes, when all seems lost, fate places in our path exactly the person we need to teach us that it's never too late to find the home our heart has always been searching for. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment on what you thought of my story with a rating from 0 to 10, and thank you very much.